The black Mercedes pulled up to the iron gates, and they swung open automatically. David Harrison sat in the back seat, barely looking up from his phone as his driver navigated the long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. This was it, his newest purchase. A sprawling estate in one of Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhoods, complete with 8 bedrooms, a pool, tennis courts, and more square footage than he'd probably ever use. At 35 years old, David had done what most people only dream about. He'd built a tech company from his college dorm room and sold it for more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Now he collected properties the way some people collect stamps. This mansion was property number 7. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, and David finally looked up. The house was impressive, he had to admit. Stone facade, tall columns, windows that seemed to go on forever. It looked like something out of a movie. His real estate agent had assured him it was a steal at $12 million, especially since it came fully staffed. The previous owners had moved to Europe and wanted a quick sale. David stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble steps. The front doors opened before he could reach them, and a woman stood there waiting. She was older, maybe in her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple uniform and had her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Harrison, welcome. I am Rosa Martinez, the housekeeper," she said with a slight accent, her voice warm and respectful. David gave her a quick nod, already walking past her into the grand foyer. "Right. The previous owners mentioned you'd be staying on." "That's fine. I'll need coffee every morning at 6, black, no sugar. I don't eat breakfast, but I'll want lunch ready by 1 o'clock, something light. Dinner at 8 when I'm home, which won't be often. I have a list of dietary preferences I'll email to you." He didn't wait for her response. His eyes were scanning the interior, taking in the crystal chandelier, the sweeping staircase, the artwork on the walls. Everything looked expensive and pristine. Good. That's what he'd paid for. Rosa stood quietly by the door, watching him. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. Would you like me to show you around the house?" "Not necessary. I had the tour when I bought the place." David was already on his phone again, typing out an email. "Just make sure everything stays clean. I can't stand mess, and I value my privacy, so unless I call for you, I'd prefer not to be disturbed." "I understand, sir." David barely registered her response. Over the next hour, he walked through the house on his own, mentally planning which room would be his office, where he'd set up his home gym, which guest rooms he'd renovate first. The place had good bones, but it needed his touch. The previous owners had decorated it like a museum, all antiques and old-world charm. He wanted modern, sleek, minimalist. In the following days, David settled into a routine. He'd wake up at 5:30, find his coffee waiting exactly where he wanted it, work in his office until afternoon, grab the lunch that appeared like magic in the kitchen, then head back to work. Sometimes he'd go into the city for meetings. Sometimes he'd work from home. It didn't matter. The house ran smoothly without him having to think about it. Rosa was always there, but she was like a ghost. He'd hear her moving through the house, see evidence of her work in the perfectly made beds and spotless floors, but they rarely spoke. That's exactly how David liked it. He'd had enough of people trying to get close to him, to befriend him because of his money. Staff should be efficient and invisible. Rosa seemed to understand that. 3 weeks into living at the estate, David decided to throw a dinner party. Not because he particularly enjoyed entertaining, but because he needed to. There were investors he wanted to impress, potential partners for his next venture. A dinner at his mansion would show them he was serious, established, worth their time and money. He called Rosa into his office one afternoon. She appeared within minutes, her expression patient and attentive. "I'm having people over on Saturday night. 8 guests, important business contacts. I need everything to be perfect," David said, not looking up from his computer screen. "I've hired a catering company from the city. They're supposed to be the best. You'll just need to coordinate with them and make sure the dining room is set up properly." "Of course, Mr. Harrison. What time should we expect the guests?" 7 o'clock. The caterers will arrive at 4 to set up." He finally glanced at her. "This is important, so I need you to stay on top of everything. These people expect excellence, I understand. You can count on me." Saturday arrived, and David spent the morning getting everything else ready. He'd rented additional furniture, hired someone to arrange flowers throughout the house, even brought in a pianist to play background music. Everything had to create the right impression. At 3:30, David's phone rang. It was the catering company. "Mr. Harrison, I'm so sorry, but we've had an emergency. Our head chef was in a car accident this morning, and half our staff called in sick. We've been trying to find replacements, but with such short notice, it's impossible. We're going to have to cancel." David felt his blood pressure spike. "Cancel? You can't cancel."
I have 8 people coming in 3 hours.
"We're truly sorry, sir. Of course, there will be no charge, and we'd like to offer you a 50% discount on any future event." "I don't want a discount. I want dinner for 8 people tonight." But the line had already gone dead. David stood in his office, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. This couldn't be happening. He'd already confirmed with all his guests. These were people who could make or break his next business deal. He couldn't just serve them pizza or call for Chinese takeout. He stormed through the house looking for Rosa. He found her in the dining room, arranging the table settings with careful precision. "We have a problem," he snapped. "The caterers canceled. Some excuse about their chef and sick staff. These people are coming in less than 3 hours and I have nothing to serve them." Rosa looked at him calmly, not seeming nearly as panicked as he felt. "I see, that is unfortunate. Unfortunate. It's a disaster." David ran his hand through his hair. "I can't believe this is happening. Do you know any other catering companies? Anyone who could pull this off on short notice?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps I could prepare the dinner." David stared at her. "You? No offense, but these people are used to 5-star restaurants. I need something impressive, not just regular home cooking." Something flickered in Rosa's eyes, but her voice remained even. "I understand your concern, but I assure you, I am capable of preparing a meal that will impress your guests. I have experience with this kind of dinner party." David wanted to argue, but what choice did he have? It was either let Rosa try or cancel the entire evening, which would be humiliating and potentially ruin his business prospects. "Fine," he said finally, "but it needs to be elegant. These people have eaten at the best restaurants in New York. If it's not good enough, it will reflect badly on me." "I understand. Please leave it to me." David spent the next few hours pacing anxiously. He could hear Rosa moving around in the kitchen, but he didn't go in to check on her. He didn't want to know if it was going badly. Instead, he tried to come up with backup plans, backup excuses, anything that might save the evening if dinner turned out to be a disaster. At 6:30, he finally went to check the dining room. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The table was set beautifully with candles, fresh flowers, and elegant place settings. But more than that, there were appetizers arranged on silver platters, looking like something from a magazine. They were artistic, sophisticated, nothing like what he'd expected. Rosa appeared from the kitchen, still calm and composed. "The first course will be ready shortly after your guests arrive. Mr. Harrison, everything is on schedule." David wanted to ask her what she was making, how she'd pulled this together so quickly, but his doorbell rang. His guests were arriving. The evening that followed was unlike anything David had expected. Course after course appeared from the kitchen, each one more impressive than the last. There was a delicate soup with herbs he couldn't identify, a salad with flavors that somehow worked perfectly together, a main course that had his guests asking for seconds, and a dessert that actually made one of the investors close his eyes and smile. "David, this is incredible," one of the men said. "Where did you find this caterer? I need their number." David forced a smile, uncomfortable with taking credit but not sure what else to say. "They're exclusive. Very hard to book." As the evening wound down and his guests left, each one praising the meal and the evening, David stood in the now empty dining room feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt small. It was almost midnight when he found Rosa in the kitchen wiping down the counters. She looked tired but satisfied with her work. David struggled to find words. "That was really impressive. I don't know how you did it." Rosa smiled softly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I'm glad your dinner was successful." For the first time since moving into the house, David really looked at her, really saw her as more than just staff, more than just someone who worked for him. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked. Rosa paused in her cleaning, and something in her expression changed. It wasn't pride exactly, but there was a story there, David could tell. A story he'd never bothered to ask about. Rosa set down the dish towel and turned to face David fully. In the dim kitchen light, her face looked different somehow. There was a depth to her expression that he'd never noticed before, probably because he'd never really looked. "I owned 3 restaurants in Mexico City, Mr. Harrison," she said simply. "I had a team of 15 chefs working under me. We were known throughout the city for our cuisine." David felt like someone had just thrown cold water in his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. 3 restaurants? 15 chefs? This woman who he'd barely spoken to, who he'd treated as nothing more than household staff, had run successful businesses? "I don't understand," he finally managed to say. "If you had all that, what are you doing here? Working as a housekeeper?" Rosa pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down slowly, as if the weight of the evening had finally caught up with her. After a moment's hesitation, David sat down across from her. It felt strange sitting in his own kitchen having a real conversation with his housekeeper, but something had shifted tonight. "My daughter Lucia was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 16, Rosa began, her voice steady but soft. "The treatments she needed were not available in Mexico, or they were too expensive, even with everything I had. I sold 1 restaurant to pay for the first round of treatments, but it wasn't enough. The doctor said her best chance was in the United States." David listened, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Not because of Rosa's story, but because of how he'd treated her without knowing any of this. Without caring to know. "I sold the other 2 restaurants and used everything I had to bring Lucia here. The medical bills were enormous, more than I'd imagined. I needed work immediately. Work that would allow me to be near the hospital, to have flexible hours when she needed me. A family friend knew someone who needed a housekeeper in Connecticut. It was a way to stay in the country legally and make money while being there for my daughter." "What happened to her?" David asked quietly. Rosa's smile was sad but peaceful. "She had 10 good years, Mr. Harrison. 10 years of life, of laughing, of growing into a beautiful young woman. She passed away 5 years ago, just before her 27th birthday. But those years were worth everything I gave up." David sat back in his chair, feeling like the worst kind of person. Here he'd been, living in his mansion, barely acknowledging this woman who made his life run smoothly, never once considering that she might have her own story, her own losses, her own past that was just as significant as his. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. "I had no idea. How could you?" "You never asked." Rosa said it without accusation, just stating a fact. Most people don't ask. They see the uniform and think that's all there is to see. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. David thought about all the people in his life who he treated the same way. His driver, the barista at his coffee shop, the security guard at his office building. How many of them had stories he'd never bothered to learn? "Why do you stay?" David asked. "I mean, working in houses like this. If you had the skills to run restaurants, couldn't you do something else?" Rosa stood up and started making tea, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew every corner intimately. "I could, perhaps. But Mr. Harrison, I learned something through losing everything and then losing Lucia. I learned that wealth is not just money in a bank account. It is not just possessions or status." She set a cup of tea in front of him and one in front of her chair before sitting down again. "I am wealthy in ways that matter more than money. I have memories of my daughter's laugh. I have the satisfaction of knowing I gave her every chance at life. I have peace in my heart because I lived with dignity through all of it. I have the knowledge that I can create beauty with my hands, whether in a restaurant kitchen or in this one." David wrapped his hands around the warm cup, staring into the tea. "But don't you feel like you've come down in the world? From owning restaurants to cleaning someone else's house?" "Come down?" Rosa shook her head. "No, Mr. Harrison, I have simply taken a different path. Each job has its own dignity if we bring dignity to it. I take pride in keeping a beautiful home. I take pride in cooking meals that nourish people. I take pride in doing my work well, whatever that work may be." She paused, looking at him with those knowing eyes. "You have many things, Mr. Harrison. This beautiful house, expensive cars, more money than you need. But if I may speak freely, you live like a poor man." David felt a flash of defensiveness. "Poor? I'm worth millions." "Poor in the ways that truly matter," Rosa said gently. "Poor in connection with other people. Poor in gratitude for what you have. Poor in seeing the richness that exists all around you in the people you encounter every day. You walk through your life as if you are alone, as if no one else really exists or matters. That is the deepest poverty I know." Her words hit David like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't, because she was right. When was the last time he'd had a real conversation with someone? When was the last time he'd felt genuinely connected to another human being? When was the last time he'd cared about someone else's story? I never thought about it that way, he admitted. Most people don't until something forces them to see differently. Rosa sipped her tea. You called me tonight in a panic, desperate because your caterer's canceled. You didn't think I could help you. You assumed that because I am your housekeeper, I must be limited in my abilities. But everyone you meet has depths you cannot see unless you take time to look. David thought about the evening, about how he'd almost dismissed Rosa's offer to cook. If he'd had any other option, he would have. And he would have missed out on a meal that his guests were still texting him about, calling it one of the best dinners they'd ever had. You saved me tonight, he said. If it weren't for you, I would have lost a major business opportunity. Those investors are now seriously interested in backing my next project. I'm glad I could help, Rosa said. But Mr. Harrison, I did not do it for your business deal. I did it because it is my job and I take my responsibilities seriously. It is who I am, regardless of whether you notice or appreciate it. That made David feel even worse. She'd worked a miracle in his kitchen not for recognition or thanks, but simply because it was the right thing to do, because she took pride in her work, even when that work was invisible to him. I've been terrible to you, David said suddenly. Not mean exactly, but dismissive. Like you didn't matter, like you were just part of the house, not a real person. Rosa tilted her head thoughtfully. You have been distant, yes. But you are not cruel. You are simply lonely, I think. And sometimes lonely people build walls so high that they forget there is a world beyond them. I'm not lonely, David protested automatically. I have plenty of contacts, business associates, people I know. Knowing people and connecting with people are very different things, Mr. Harrison. Rosa finished her tea and stood up to rinse her cup. You can know 1,000 people and still be completely alone. Connection requires vulnerability. It requires seeing others as fully human, with their own struggles and triumphs and stories. It requires letting them see you as human too. David sat at the table long after Rosa had said goodnight and retired to her quarters. He thought about his life, really examined it for the first time in years. He had money, success, property, possessions. But who did he have? Who really knew him? Who would care if he disappeared tomorrow? Beyond how it affected their business interests, the answer was sobering. No one. He'd spent so long chasing success, acquiring more and more that he'd forgotten to build anything real. He had a mansion but not a home. He had employees but not friends. He had wealth but not richness. The next morning, David found himself doing something unusual. Instead of staying in his office, he went looking for Rosa. He found her in the garden, tending to the rose bushes. The morning sun caught her silver hair, and she looked peaceful kneeling in the dirt with her gardening gloves on. Good morning, Rosa, he said. She looked up, surprised to see him. Good morning, Mr. Harrison. Is something wrong? Do you need something? No, David felt awkward, unsure how to do this. I just wanted to say good morning, and to ask if you'd have coffee with me. I mean, if you have time. If you're not too busy. Rosa studied his face for a moment, then smiled. I would like that very much. Let me wash my hands. They sat on the back terrace with their coffee, and for the first time David asked questions. Real questions. He asked about Rosa's life in Mexico City, about her restaurants and what kind of food they served. He asked about her daughter, what she was like, what she loved to do. Rosa answered, and as she talked, David began to see her as a complete person. Not just his housekeeper, but a woman with a whole lifetime of experiences. A woman who had loved deeply and lost deeply. A woman who had built something from nothing and then sacrificed it all for her child. A woman who had more strength and grace than most people he knew. You mentioned you had 15 chefs working for you, David said. What was that like, managing a team that size? Rosa's eyes lit up. It was challenging but wonderful. Each chef had their own specialty, their own personality. The key was understanding what each person needed to do their best work. Some needed encouragement, some needed space, some needed very clear direction. Leadership, I learned, is not about being the boss. It is about helping each person shine in their own way. David thought about his own management style. He barked orders and expected results. He didn't think about what his employees needed or how to help them succeed. He just demanded performance. I think I have a lot to learn about leadership, he admitted. We all do, always, Rosa said. The moment we think we know everything is the moment we stop growing. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in David's house. He started joining Rosa for morning coffee regularly. Sometimes they talked about serious things, sometimes about simple things like the weather or a funny story from Rosa's past. But they talked, really talked, and David found himself looking forward to these conversations more than his business meetings. Rosa told him about her childhood in Mexico, growing up in a small village where her grandmother taught her to cook. She told him about meeting her husband and how they'd built their first restaurant together before he passed away from a heart attack. She told him about Lucia's love of music and how she'd wanted to be a teacher. In return, David found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He told Rosa about his own childhood, about parents who were never satisfied with his achievements, always pushing for more. He told her about the loneliness of success, how the higher he climbed, the more isolated he felt. He told her about failed relationships, about friendships that had faded because he was always too busy for them. "You know what's strange?" David said one morning. "I have all this money, all these things, but the best part of my day is sitting here having coffee with you. Just talking. When did life become so complicated that simple conversation feels revolutionary?" Rosa smiled. "Life becomes as complicated as we make it. We fill our days with tasks and acquisitions thinking that's what will make us happy. But happiness is usually found in the simple moments. A good conversation, a beautiful morning, a meal shared with someone who matters to you." "You matter to me," David said suddenly, surprising himself. "I know that sounds strange to say to someone who works for me, but it's true. These past few weeks talking with you, learning from you, it's changed something in me." "It doesn't sound strange at all," Rosa replied. "We all need to matter to someone. We all need to be seen as who we truly are, not just what we do or what role we play. You are beginning to see people, Mr. Harrison, including yourself." That afternoon, David did something he hadn't done in years. He called his driver and asked about his family. The man was so surprised he nearly dropped his phone. David learned that his driver had 2 kids in college and a wife who was recovering from surgery. David had ridden in that car hundreds of times and never knew any of this. He started paying attention to the people around him. The woman who cleaned his office building and always smiled even though he'd never smiled back. The young man at his favorite coffee shop who always got his order right. The security guard who worked nights at his downtown office. Each one had a name, a story, a life beyond their job. One Thursday morning, about 2 months after that first conversation in the kitchen, David came down to find Rosa moving more slowly than usual. Her face looked tired and she winced slightly as she reached for the coffee pot. "Are you all right?" David asked, concerned. "Just a little stiff this morning," Rosa said, waving off his concern. "My back has been bothering me." "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and David could see that. Over the next few days, he noticed Rosa struggling with tasks that normally seemed effortless for her. She was slower on the stairs, more careful with heavy items, and he caught her pressing her hand against her lower back several times. "Rosa, you need to see a doctor," David said finally. "This isn't just stiffness. I've been to doctors before, Mr. Harrison. They say it's arthritis and old injuries from years of standing in restaurant kitchens. There's not much to be done except manage the pain." She said it matter-of-factly, but David could hear the resignation in her voice. "Have you seen a specialist? Someone who focuses on this kind of thing?" Rosa smiled at his concern. "Specialists are expensive, Mr. Harrison. My insurance covers basic care, but not much beyond that. I manage just fine." David made a decision right then. "I want you to see the best specialist in the state. I'll make the appointment and cover whatever insurance doesn't." No arguments. Rosa started to protest, but something in David's expression stopped her. "That's very kind of you." "It's not kind, it's right," David said firmly. "You take care of this house and you take care of me. The least I can do is make sure you're properly cared for." The appointment revealed that Rosa needed physical therapy and possibly a minor surgery to correct an old injury that had never healed properly. The total cost would be significant, but David arranged everything without hesitation. He even drove Rosa to her first physical therapy appointment himself. Sitting in the waiting room, David looked around at the other people there. An elderly man with a cane, a young woman with her arm in a sling, a middle-aged man on crutches. Each one had their own story, their own struggle. A few months ago, David would have sat here staring at his phone, not seeing any of them. Now he found himself wondering about their lives, hoping they had someone who cared about their recovery the way he cared about Rosa's. "Mr. Harrison?" Rosa emerged from her session looking tired but optimistic. The therapist says I should see improvement in a few weeks if I keep up with the exercises. That's great news, David said, genuinely pleased. And I meant what I said. Whatever you need, however many sessions it takes. In the car on the way home, Rosa was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You've changed, Mr. Harrison. When you first moved into the house, you wouldn't have noticed if I was in pain. You certainly wouldn't have cared enough to do all this." "I'm ashamed of that," David admitted. "I was so wrapped up in my own world, my own concerns, that I didn't see anyone else clearly." "You opened my eyes, Rosa. You showed me that I was living in a very small, very lonely world of my own making." "You opened your own eyes," Rosa corrected gently. "I just held up a mirror. But I'm proud of you for looking at what you saw and choosing to change." That weekend, David found himself thinking about all the people who worked for him or provided services he relied on. How many of them struggled with problems he never considered? How many could benefit from help he could easily provide? He started researching. He learned about the lack of healthcare benefits for many service workers. He learned about the struggles of single parents working multiple jobs. He learned about elderly workers who couldn't afford to retire despite aching bodies and tired minds. On Monday morning, David called a meeting with his lawyer and accountant. "I want to start a foundation," he announced. "Something that provides healthcare assistance and support for service workers. I want to help people like Rosa, people who give so much but often struggle to take care of themselves." His accountant looked surprised. "That's quite a departure from your usual investments, Mr. Harrison. May I ask what prompted this?" "I learned something important," David said. "Money sitting in an account doesn't do anyone any good. It's just numbers. But money used to help people to make their lives better. That actually means something. That creates real value." Over the next few weeks, David threw himself into planning the foundation with the same intensity he'd once reserved for building his company. But this felt different. This felt meaningful in a way that making more money never had. Rosa watched this transformation with quiet pride. One morning, as they sat having coffee, she said, "You know, when Lucia was sick, I used to lie awake at night worrying about how I'd pay for her next treatment. There were times I had to choose between her medicine and buying groceries. No one should have to make those choices. That's exactly what I want to prevent," David said. "I can't help everyone, but I can help some people. And maybe if the foundation grows, we can help more and more." "You're learning the secret," Rosa said with a smile. "What secret?" "That giving isn't about making yourself feel good, though it often does. It's about recognizing that we're all connected. Your well-being is tied to my well-being is tied to the well-being of the person down the street. When we lift each other up, everyone rises." As spring turned to summer, Rosa's physical therapy was showing results. She moved more easily, smiled more often, and the lines of pain around her eyes had softened. David had also hired an assistant housekeeper to help with the heavier tasks, despite Rosa's protests that she didn't need help. "Everyone needs help sometimes," David had told her firmly, "and there's no shame in accepting it." The foundation was taking shape too. David had named it the Lucia Foundation, in honor of Rosa's daughter, and Rosa had cried when he told her. They were setting up partnerships with hospitals and clinics to help cover medical costs for service workers who fell through the gaps in insurance coverage. One evening, David hosted another dinner party, but this one was different. He'd invited the people who worked for him regularly: his driver, his office staff, the landscaper, the pool maintenance person, along with some of his business associates. He wanted them to meet each other as equals, as people, not as separate classes. Rosa prepared the meal again, but this time David introduced her properly to everyone. "This is Rosa Martinez, the talented chef responsible for this incredible food. She owned 3 successful restaurants in Mexico City before coming to the United States. I'm lucky to have her in my home." Rosa blushed at the praise, but David could see how much it meant to her to be recognized not just as household staff, but as the skilled professional she was. During dinner, David found himself having real conversations with people he'd known for years but never really talked to. His driver told funny stories about celebrities he'd driven before working for David. The landscaper shared his dream of opening his own garden center someday. One of his office employees revealed that she was taking night classes to finish her degree. After everyone left, David and Rosa cleaned up together, something that would have been unthinkable when he first moved in. "That was a good evening," Rosa said. You brought people together across the lines that usually divide them. That takes courage. It didn't feel courageous, David replied. It just felt right. Like this is how things should be. That's how you know it's truly courage, Rosa said. When doing the right thing feels so natural that you wonder why everyone doesn't do it. A few days later, David received a call from one of the investors who'd been at that first dinner party months ago, the one where Rosa's cooking had saved the evening. The man was calling not about business, but to tell David that he wanted to contribute to the Lucia Foundation. I've been thinking about what you said at your recent dinner, the investor explained, about how we're all connected, how we all have a responsibility to each other. My mother was a housekeeper, David. She worked her whole life cleaning other people's homes, and she struggled every day. No one ever saw her as anything more than the help. What you're doing, recognizing the dignity in all work and all people, it matters. I want to be part of that. After hanging up, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just satisfaction or pride, but genuine joy. The kind of deep happiness that comes from knowing you're doing something that truly matters. He found Rosa in the library, dusting the bookshelves. I have to tell you something, he said, and shared the news about the investor. Rosa set down her dustcloth and hugged him. It was the first time she'd ever done that, and David realized it was the first genuine hug he'd received in longer than he could remember. You see, Rosa said, pulling back to look at him. This is what happens when we live with open hearts. Good spreads like ripples in water, touching more and more people. You started by just noticing me as a person. Now look what's growing from that one small act. It wasn't small, David said. You taught me that there's no such thing as a small act of recognition, a small moment of treating someone with dignity. Every interaction either builds people up or tears them down. I was tearing people down without even knowing it, just by my indifference. That night, David sat in his study thinking about how much his life had changed. He looked around at his expensive furniture, his valuable art, his symbols of success. They were still there, but they didn't define him anymore. They were just things. What defined him now was different. It was the morning coffees with Rosa. It was the foundation that would help people like her daughter. It was learning the names and stories of everyone he encountered. It was beginning to understand that real wealth had nothing to do with his bank account. He thought about the man he'd been when he first walked through these doors. That man had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. He'd been rich and poor at the same time, though he couldn't see it. Now he was beginning to understand what Rosa had tried to tell him that night in the kitchen. True poverty wasn't about money. It was about disconnection, about going through life without really seeing or being seen by others. And true wealth was about connection, about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet and letting them recognize yours. His phone buzzed with an email. Another potential donor for the foundation. Someone who'd heard about it from a friend. The work was growing, spreading, touching more lives, and it had all started because he'd finally stopped long enough to really see the woman who'd been right in front of him all along. David smiled and opened his laptop to respond to the email. He had work to do, but it was different work now. Work that mattered. Work that connected him to others rather than isolating him from them. Work that would honor the lesson Rosa had taught him. The lesson he was still learning every day. That every person carries a universe inside them. Every person deserves to be seen, to be recognized, to be treated with dignity. And when we take the time to truly see each other, we discover that we're all richer than we ever imagined. The Lucia Foundation officially launched on a warm September morning. David had rented a community center in a working-class neighborhood, deliberately choosing a location that felt welcoming and accessible rather than intimidating. He wanted the people the foundation was meant to serve to feel comfortable walking through the doors. Rosa stood beside him as they cut the ribbon, and David insisted she say a few words to the small crowd that had gathered. Local service workers, healthcare providers, community leaders, and a handful of reporters were all there to witness the beginning of something new. My daughter Lucia taught me that love is measured not in words, but in actions, Rosa said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Mr. Harrison has taken that lesson to heart. This foundation is not charity. It is recognition. Recognition that the people who care for our homes, serve our food, clean our buildings, and make our daily lives possible deserve the same access to healthcare and support that everyone deserves. Lucia would be proud. I'm proud, The applause was warm and genuine. David felt a lump in his throat as he stepped forward to speak about the Foundation's mission and how people could apply for assistance. But what struck him most was looking out at the faces in the crowd and actually seeing them. Seeing their hope, their struggles, their humanity. After the event, a woman approached him hesitantly. She was probably in her 40s, wearing a cleaning service uniform, and she looked nervous. "Mr. Harrison, I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "My son needs surgery on his leg. He was in an accident 2 years ago and it never healed right. He limps and it hurts him, but the surgery isn't covered by my insurance. They say it's not necessary, but they don't see him cry at night when the pain is bad." Her voice broke. "I applied to the foundation this morning. If we get help, if he can have the surgery, it will change his life." David felt his chest tighten. This is what it was all about. Not abstract concepts or tax write-offs or feeling good about himself. This was about a boy who was hurting and a mother who couldn't fix it alone. "What's your name?" David asked. "Patricia?" "Patricia Reyes." "Patricia, I'm going to personally make sure your application gets fast-tracked. Give me your contact information. We'll have someone reach out to you within 24 hours. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by telling people that help is available, that they don't have to struggle alone. That's how you can help us grow this thing." After she left, Rosa put her hand on David's arm. "Do you see now? This is what I meant about true wealth. You just gave that woman something money can't buy. You gave her hope." Over the following months, the foundation grew faster than David had anticipated. Word spread through communities of workers who had long felt invisible and undervalued. Applications poured in, stories of people struggling with medical bills, dental problems they couldn't afford to fix, medications they had to skip to pay rent, children who needed care their parents couldn't provide. David read every application himself. He wanted to know the people he was helping, wanted to understand their situations. Each one reminded him of Rosa's story, of how easily any of them could be in those circumstances. The foundation couldn't help everyone who applied, which frustrated David deeply. But they helped many. They paid for a janitor's wife to get cancer treatment. They covered physical therapy for a restaurant worker injured on the job. They provided dental care for a security guard who hadn't smiled in years because he was ashamed of his teeth. Each success felt personal, meaningful in a way his business victories never had. One afternoon, David was working in his home office when Rosa knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, there's someone here to see you." She says she's from a television station. David hadn't expected media attention, but he agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Chen, wanted to do a feature story on the foundation for a local news program. "What inspired you to start this foundation?" Jennifer asked, her camera operator filming their conversation in David's living room. David glanced at Rosa, who was bringing in tea for them. "Rosa inspired me. She taught me something crucial that I'd somehow missed in all my years of business success. She taught me that every person has value, has a story, has dignity that deserves recognition. She showed me that I'd been living in a very small world even in this big house because I wasn't really connecting with anyone." "Can you elaborate on that?" "I thought success meant accumulating things. The biggest house, the best cars, the most impressive investment portfolio. But I was lonely and didn't even realize it. Rosa helped me understand that real success is about connection, about seeing other people clearly and letting yourself be seen, about using whatever resources you have to lift others up." Jennifer turned to Rosa. "Mrs. Martinez, what was it like working for Mr. Harrison before this transformation?" Rosa smiled gently. "He was not unkind, but he was distant. Like many busy people, he saw roles rather than individuals. I was the housekeeper, not Rosa. But everyone has the capacity to change, to grow. Mr. Harrison chose to look deeper, and that made all the difference." The segment aired the following week, and David was unprepared for the response. His phone rang constantly. People wanted to donate to the foundation. Other business owners wanted to know how they could start similar programs. Workers reached out with their stories, their struggles, their gratitude that someone with resources was paying attention. But not all the responses were positive. Some of David's old business associates called him naive. Some accused him of virtue signaling, trying to make himself look good. A few suggested he was being taken advantage of by people looking for handouts. David found these calls frustrating, but Rosa helped him put them in perspective. People fear what challenges their worldview, she told him. If they accept that you found something meaningful, they have to question whether they're living meaningfully themselves. That's uncomfortable. Let them have their opinions. You know it's true. One particularly harsh critic was Robert Chen, a fellow tech entrepreneur David had known for years. Robert cornered him at a business conference, his voice dripping with condescension. Come on, David. This whole foundation thing, the media appearances, it's a bit much, don't you think? We both know you're doing this for the tax breaks and the PR. David felt his anger rise, but he took a breath before responding. Actually, Robert, I'm doing it because I realized I was living a very empty life. I had everything and nothing at the same time. But you wouldn't understand that because you're still where I was. You're still measuring your worth by your net worth. Robert laughed uncomfortably. And you're what, enlightened now? Because you throw some money at poor people and feel good about yourself? No, I'm not enlightened. I'm just learning to see people as people, including myself. David kept his voice calm. You know what the sad thing is, Robert? I look at you now and I see myself 6 months ago. Successful, wealthy, and completely alone. The difference is I got lucky. I met someone who cared enough to show me there was another way to live. He walked away from Robert feeling not anger but something closer to pity. How many people were trapped in the same mindset he'd had, thinking that success meant isolation, that vulnerability was weakness, that the people who served them were somehow less worthy of consideration. Back at home, David shared the conversation with Rosa as they had their evening tea in the garden. The summer flowers were in full bloom and the evening air was warm and pleasant. You handled that well, Rosa said. You didn't let him make you doubt what you're doing. It's hard sometimes, David admitted. Part of me wonders if they're right. If I'm just doing this to make myself feel better. And what if you are? Rosa asked. What if helping people does make you feel better? Is that wrong? The woman whose son got surgery, does she care whether you feel good about helping? No, she cares that her son can walk without pain now. The good you do doesn't become less good because you benefit from it too. We're allowed to feel joy when we help others. That's part of being human. David nodded, feeling reassured. I got another interesting call today. A reporter from a national magazine wants to do a story about the foundation. They're calling it a model for how wealthy individuals can give back in meaningful ways. That's wonderful. More publicity means more people will know help is available. Yeah, but Rosa, they want to make me the focus. They want to talk about my transformation, my journey. It feels wrong. This should be about the people we're helping, not about me. Rosa was quiet for a moment, thinking. Perhaps it needs to be about both. People need to see that change is possible, that even someone who seemed to have everything can discover they had nothing of real value. Your story might inspire others to look at their own lives differently. That's valuable too. The magazine article came out 2 months later, and it did exactly what Rosa predicted. David received messages from people all over the country saying the story had made them reconsider how they treated service workers, how they thought about success, how they lived their daily lives. One message particularly moved him. It was from a young tech entrepreneur, not unlike David had been, who wrote, I read your story and realized I don't know my housekeeper's name. I've lived in my house for 3 years and she's been there twice a week that entire time, and I couldn't tell you a single thing about her. That's shameful. Tomorrow I'm going to actually talk to her, actually see her. Thank you for waking me up. David showed the message to Rosa. This is what you meant about ripples, isn't it? One person changes and that inspires another person to change and it keeps spreading. Exactly, Rosa said with a satisfied smile. You thought you were just learning to be a better person, but you're actually teaching others how to do the same. That's the real legacy, Mr. Harrison. Not the foundation, though that's important. The real legacy is showing people a different way to live. As autumn arrived, David found himself reflecting on the past year. Everything had changed, and yet in some ways everything was the same. He still lived in the same house, still had the same money, still had the same basic daily routine. But he was different. The world looked different to him now. He noticed things he'd never seen before. The way the morning light hit Rosa's garden, the pride in his driver's voice when he talked about his kids, the quiet dignity of the woman who cleaned his office building. The whole world had become richer, more textured, more full of meaning. One evening, as he and Rosa sat in the library, David said, I've been thinking about something you said, about how I lived like a poor man despite having money. I understand that now. But I'm wondering, What does it mean to live like a rich person in the way you mean it? Rosa set down her book and considered the question carefully. It means waking up grateful for another day. It means noticing the people around you and taking joy in their presence. It means using what you have, whether it's money or time or skills, to make someone else's life a little easier. It means being vulnerable enough to let people see the real you. It means finding purpose beyond accumulation. It means understanding that we're all connected, and that connection is the greatest treasure we can have. I'm still learning, David said. Some days I catch myself falling back into old patterns. I get so focused on a project that I stop seeing people again, but now I notice when I'm doing it. That's progress, right? That's enormous progress, Rosa assured him. We all slip sometimes. What matters is that you catch yourself and correct course. You're human, Mr. Harrison. You're allowed to be imperfect. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and David realized that this, right here, was wealth. This moment of peace and connection with someone who had become not just an employee but a friend, a teacher, a guiding light. This feeling of being truly known and accepted, this sense of purpose and meaning in his life. He'd been a millionaire for years, but he was only now beginning to understand what it meant to be truly rich. 6 months had passed since that life-changing conversation in the kitchen. The foundation had grown beyond anything David and Rosa had imagined. They had helped 43 families with medical expenses, saved 3 children's lives through emergency funding, and created a network of volunteer doctors and nurses across 5 states. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that mattered. The thank you letters from parents, the photos of children who are now healthy and smiling, the gratitude in people's eyes when they realized someone cared about their struggle. David's entire life had transformed. His mansion no longer felt like a cold museum. He had invited families from the foundation to use the pool on weekends. He hosted community dinners where people from all walks of life gathered around his table. The house that had once been a symbol of his isolation had become a hub of connection and warmth. His business was doing better than ever, but it wasn't his main focus anymore. He had hired a management team to handle the day-to-day operations, and he spent most of his time on the foundation. His investors surprisingly supported this shift. Many of them had been inspired by his story and had started their own charitable initiatives.